Good morning, everyone. Good morning to those online and to everyone here live. So we were looking at the question of the fairness and unfairness of the world. Not going in detail through the concepts of Tzaddik Viralo, Rasha V'Tolo, why the righteous suffer and the wicked sometimes prosper, but more specifically at the spiritual opportunities open for those who live further removed from the center of monotheism, from the insights of monotheism. What can we really expect from those areas which are isolated, perhaps from the rest of the world? Maybe people have never really had access to Torah, to the insights of Torah, and often face very miserable existences, both physically and spiritually. We correctly so are delighted with the fact that more than half the world's population belong, at least nominally, to a monotheistic faith. So Avraham Avinu, in his mission as Avraham HaIvri, as a single individual who began spreading belief in monotheism, he wasn't the only monotheist, of course. Shem and Ava and others were Melchizedek, were believers in Hashem. Avraham had his mission to spread monotheism. Has succeeded succeeded very well in doing that, as the Rambam points out in a censored piece, or semi-censored piece in his Mishnah Torah. Even though we have very mixed views about Christianity and Islam, and in many respects they are deeply and profoundly problematic. In one respect, there's a positive in that they lay a groundwork for eventual realization by the whole world of monotheism, and lay the groundwork for the era of Mashiach and the spread of knowledge and awareness of Hashem. And in this sense, this is a success in spreading monotheism, albeit maybe flawed monotheism in the case of Christianity, to the world. Nonetheless, we have a problem. Why are there large parts of the world that don't seem to have access to these things, and what hope is there for these individuals? So last week I mentioned two thoughts really from Rabbi Zobin, which led to Leonard sharing this article here. The first thought from Rabbi Zobin is that he argues that belief in Ikrei Hadas, in the basics of Emunah, should be poshet, should be obvious to every person. And he says, how can a 13-year-old bar mitzvah boy or 12-year-old bar mitzvah girl be expected to believe that which great philosophers have struggled over? And his response is that it's true, look, one can make anything overly complicated, and particularly because there's a negias, a bias, thrown in very often to avoid emunah and the responsibilities and consequences that go with it. If one thinks straight without overcomplicating things, and one doesn't allow one's bias to sway one, then the basic Ikrei Hadas, the basic premises of Yiddishkeit, should be obvious to all of us. We don't need to be sophisticated philosophers. We discussed last week, this isn't an anti-philosophical argument. It's simply a philosophically skeptical argument, which I think many people, including many philosophers, have, which is as much as you engage in philosophy, we're all aware that very, very rarely does it reach clear conclusions. Philosophy is a difficult subject, and then there are many issues that remain mysterious, even though we can function well without the clarity. Perhaps the most fascinating areas of philosophy nowadays are around things like consciousness and the mind. These are really interesting topics, but we all know that we are conscious. We experience life, we work with our minds, and you can be a successful scientist without knowing that much about the philosophy of science, and you can be a successful consciousness and user of the mind without necessarily knowing everything about the mind. So this isn't an anti-philosophical viewpoint like perhaps from Nachman and Breslov reflects. It's certainly a skeptical about how far philosophy can get to, and a call to be more conscious of bias than we naturally are, and an awareness that that bias has the power to distort decisions and judgment. This is one piece from Rabbi Zobin. The second concept we shared from Rabbi Zobin is his very famous mashal, which I'm not going to go to again, of the farmer. And just a reminder that Rabbi Zobin gave very movingly to his students a few days before they were martyred in the Holocaust, of a limitation of human understanding. Ultimately, there's much that we don't understand. We have a very limited perspective, and there's much that we don't understand about life also, and we only see part of human existence. We believe in Olam Haba, in a continued spiritual existence, or existence of consciousness post-death, and we have a very limited perspective on what things are about. This is a one pathway to answering these questions that are raised. Both arguing that we shouldn't overplay how complicated it is for someone to become a mamin, and secondly, arguing that we have a limited understanding when we're talking about the fairness and justice of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And both points are no doubt true. I mean, Rabbi Zobin doesn't need my approval, but both points represent very important streams of thought in the Jewish tradition, and I think we all recognize they have a lot of truth to them. So if we asked Rabbi Zobin about this goat herd in Outer Mongolia, I don't know much about goat herds in Outer Mongolia, but in our analogy, we used him as our example of this individual who has a fairly short, brutal, tough life, not much time and leisure for thinking, no real access to the higher seats of theology, and no real chance even to maybe never encounters a Christian missionary or a Muslim tradesman, and is never really given a chance to access any awareness of monotheism and so on. I think Rabbi Hanan's answer would be twofold. Part of his answer would be, it's true. I mean, it's tougher for this individual to arrive at a munah than a regular one. On the other hand, he's a human being with a mind, and there's an expectation on him to think about purpose and direction and meaning and responsibility. And he should look at the world and understand it came about through a creator, and believe in the expectations of certain standards of basic moral obligation. And therefore, such an individual has some level of responsibility and therefore ability to earn olam haba or to lose it as they choose. It's a good question, and it depends how far one extends Tinuk Shenishba. Also, it would tie into other things. I mean, Rabbi Hanan here is talking about Emunah in Hashem. I don't think he's claiming that every individual should intuit Torah min Hashemayim, or Torah Shebal Peh, or even Mashiach and Tchias HaMesim. And as the Rambam has a list of 13 ikrim, Rabbi Hanan's focus here is perhaps on the first of the ikrim. With respect to the others, presumably he would agree to Tinuk Shenishba. Rabbi Hanan, by the way, is one of the primary. Rabbi Hanan was a semi-Talmud of Rabbi Chaim Brisker. And the famous line of Rabbi Chaim Brisker of Nebuchadnezzar Apikoris is transmitted via Rabbi Hanan. We discussed how this line coincides with Tinuk Shenishba. So again, for those who remember when we spoke about fundamentals and the Ikrim, we discussed one reading of the Rambam's view, which is the Ravid asks in the Rambam, how can the Rambam say someone? The particular example the Ravid is going on is that of taking literally the anthropomorphisms in the Torah. So when the Torah describes Yad Hashem, someone who foolishly believes that means Hashem has a hand, some form of physical body, the Rambam defines such a person as a heretic. The Ravid says the person is a fool, but not a heretic. They were misled. And one way of answering the Rambam is that this isn't about moral culpability, it's about a metzius, it's about a fact. This individual, the fact isn't a believer in a monotheistic God, because they believe this God has a body. So Reb Chaim expressed this memorably with the phrase "Neber Apikoros," the poor Apikoros. No, this isn't a moral judgment, but they nonetheless are factually an Apikoros. They're still an Apikoros. The question is how this accords with the concept of a Tinuk Shenishba, which is a child brought up, captured. Tinuk Shenishba ben Agoyim is the full phrase. A child captured in childhood and grows up with a bunch of savages away from any access to the Jewish community and to our beliefs. And the Rambam, this is a concept in the Gemara. This is not the Rambam. The Gemara discusses the culpability of such an individual. The Rambam extends it to the Tzaddokim, to the Sadducees, who are living, or the Karaites actually more accurately, in the context of the Rambam, who are living cheek by jowl next door to the Orthodox Jews in Fustat, in Cairo, in Egypt, where the Rambam is living. They're engaging with them. We know now from the Cairo Knesset the degree to which the two communities were sort of came to Kiddush together. And nonetheless, they remain stubbornly in their Karaite belief. And the answer is, it's true that they are not a Tinuk Shenishba who's been dragged away by savages and lives somewhere in a desert far away from civilization. These are people living in the height of Jewish civilization, but they still qualify as Tinuk Shenishba because they never seriously managed to engage with ideas. So these two concepts need to be thought about how they go together. One way of understanding it, as we discussed when we learned, is that this would be the same as a little child. What would the Rambam say about a small baby? Is a baby a heretic? A baby can't confirm I believe in great faith. in the coming of Mashiach and so on. So does the baby have a din of a kofa? And the answer is no, because the baby is not rejecting either. The baby is simply blissfully unaware of these issues. So the concept of Tinuk Shanishma may be even an adult whose theology is baby-like, they've never seriously engaged with these issues, is not considered a heretic. Nonetheless, Rabbi Chanan remains in his point that at least with terms of emunah in Hashem, there is a mitzvah and a moral obligation, a spiritual obligation to be a mamin, and therefore he's entitled to ask, how can a 13-year-old bar mitzvah or 12-year-old bar mitzvah girl be expected to fulfill this mitzvah? And therefore says what he says. Again, Rabbi Chanan wouldn't necessarily apply to the remaining ikrim, for which we would have to come to some version of Tinuk Shanishma.
So Avram lived in a time where there's Avodah Zarah, yet he saw the emes. Is he being mechayev every person in the world? In other words, if we're created in the image of Hashem, Avram saw the emes, he didn't have Torah and everything else. All right, he had some sort of Masorah in Chanukah or whatever it is, but nevertheless, he should really be mechayev every single person.
Yeah.
And we're not going in the same. We're not brought up in the same sviva as he was. So really, our minds, we should be.
We should have it even easier. We're living in a post-open world, yeah.
So to your guy in Mongolia.
Yes.
If he's seen whatever it is, Avram's mechayev him as well.
Yeah. So Lenin's asking, surely Avram, who arrived at belief, is obligates all of us to arrive at similar conclusions. So the truth is, I have to confess, I struggle with this whole Hanan. And Avram is a good, I would argue on the opposite, it's a good reason why I struggle with Rabbi Chanan. I said, and I meant what I said, that there's no doubt what Rabbi Chanan says is correct. It doesn't need my approval. He's the great Rabbi Chanan, and any questions I have on him are said with a great modesty and awareness of the gulf. But whilst no doubt what he says is true, that we need to be conscious of, let's not overcomplicate what should be basic ideas. And additionally, we all need to be cognizant of bias. And when we remove bias from the equation, it probably is a lot simpler to arrive at truth than when we are biased. Nonetheless, I struggle with Rabbi Chanan doubly. The first reason I struggle with Rabbi Chanan is because at the end of the day, the Rambam, in his Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach, does seem to indicate in the simplest reading of that one needs to arrive at not just emunah, but also the keeping of the Sheva Mitzvos, because these are commanded at Sinai. So this is the first point. The second point is, as I mentioned before, Rabbi Chanan is talking about basic emunah and Hashem, but when we get to the more complicated beliefs, we still struggle, even in Rabbi Chanan's formulation, unless we come onto some sort of concept of Tinuk Shanishma, in which case maybe we can even apply that to the first principle of faith. Why should we limit it? If we take Rabbi Chanan as again, I want to stress, we're abusing a bit Rabbi Chanan's piece. Rabbi Chanan is explaining why and how it can be that a bar or bat mitzvah child is commanded in emunah. We're extrapolating this to a different question, which is, can we expect someone who has no access to truths to still need to arrive at truth? And can they therefore have a spiritual life without it? But at least if we take Rabbi Chanan as applies to that, we should be asking ourselves, even when it comes to the most basic foundation of belief, why can we not rely on the concept of Tinuk Shanishma? But most powerfully, I want to challenge this claim that belief is so obvious and so simple. It is true that some people live with a very strong and basic sense of emunah and really look at the world as glowing with the divine and see an obviously created world. And it's also true to say that many people struggle with it. And it's very hard to determine exactly what it is that makes it's obvious to some people and very challenging or impossible for other people. And then the truth is, when you watch debates and discussions, often both sides stare at each other with mutual frustration, because there's so many underlying sort of axioms or assumptions about what life is and how we work that lie behind these matters. To throw around the gears and bias in these discussions, I think is personally not that helpful. We all have biases, and all of us need to journey through life in our best attempt to avoid letting biases distort our judgment. But equally, each side can throw biases at the other. I mean, the Ma'amin, the believer, can claim that the non-believer enjoys a life of hefkerus and freedom, and no doubt there's some truth to that claim. And the non-Ma'amin, the heretic, can throw the claim at the Marmin that one enjoys the comfort of belief in a father and a God in our lives, and the reassurance that that belief offers one of ultimately rewards and punishment, and that one's moral sacrifices will be recompensed. And there's a comfort in that, and no doubt there's some truth in that. You know, there's no doubt that both claims have legitimacy. In addition, it's an interesting fact that most people end up, to some degree or other, more or less, where they start off in life. A individual who changes, a ger tzedek, a Baal Teshuvah, is a remarkable phenomenon, and something that deservedly should be saluted. Remarkable, takes a remarkable strength of character and honesty. The reality is most people move a little bit one way or another in life, but most people don't radically alter where they are, and therefore it's legitimate for someone to turn to a Marmin and say, well, you're a Marmin because that's how you were brought up, and this is, you know, you were Jewish, and this is the world you belong to. And again, no doubt there's some truth to that also. So what do we do with all of these by, you know, this sort of swirling sea of well, you know, whirlpool of biases in which we are trapped? The answer is all we can do is try and be as honest as we can. I mean, we cannot claim as humans to be pristine thinking machines, computers who are sort of capable of always arriving at the truth with a capital T. We now know philosophically there's probably more profound reasons why the whole concept of the truth is not entirely clear. But here I'm talking about on a non-philosophical level, the basic truths of Yiddishkeit. All we can do is we can say we've done our best. This is what we try and do. And throwing out what's called in sort of a debate or in philosophy ad hominem attacks against an individual because their bias isn't helpful. All we can talk about is ideas. All we can say is, look, these are the reasons I believe, and the non-believer will respond with the reasons they don't believe, and we can engage in discussion and debate around ideas. Not much is added by throwing around accusations of bias against the individual. Yeah, we have our bias, but we're still trying our best to think about ideas and to arrive at truth. So the bias argument only goes so far. But more profoundly than that, it seems that this is genuinely a difficult question for many people to answer. And let me give you, I've used this mashal before in this forum, in this room, but let me just give a mashal from very basic things about which we have relatively little bias. If I ask you a basic piece of arithmetic, I ask you to add up 139 plus 2,742, it will take us several seconds to get to the answer. And if I ask you to multiply, I'm asking you to do it, if I ask you to multiply these two figures, it will take us longer to do. Now, there's nothing particularly complicated about this. We all have the ability to do it, at least with a pen and paper, if not in our heads, and we could achieve it, and yet it takes us time to get to, which means that the human mind takes, like everything else that exists on planet Earth, and perhaps in the universe, takes time to get from A to B. No car, no matter how efficient, can get from 0 to 60 in 0 seconds. There's always some time for the acceleration. And similarly with our mental faculties, it takes us time to think things through, even very basic and obvious things. It's a fascinating idea. It makes us think this is another field of philosophy, not one I'm going to go into now. The philosophy of mind, the philosophy of epistemology, what it means to know things that we know. Do I know the answer to the question, I can't remember the numbers anymore, of 276 times 1,394? It's very interesting. Do I know it at this moment in time? In some respects, I don't know it because I can't tell you the number. In other respects, I do know it because my mind contains all the information that's necessary to get to the answer, and I'm perfectly capable of working it out. So it's fascinating that we can have in our heads enough information and perfectly capable of reaching it, and yet it simply takes us time to get there. This is why, by the way, we are capable of as humans of holding contradictory pieces of information in our heads. Simply, we haven't yet done the maths. We haven't yet crunched. So I may sit there firmly believing that the answer to my sum is 324,000, and yet that may be wrong because I haven't done the maths properly, and I'm therefore inconsistent in the knowledge of what I know. So we're capable of being inconsistent simply because it takes us time to crunch the data and resolve all the information we know. Now, what am I bringing out from my analogy? Simply that when it comes to emunah, it's not illegitimate to claim it's at least as complicated as this sum, if not a little more, and therefore it may simply take us time to work these things out. It may be complicated, it may simply take time to work out. Now, if in my sum, if you agree with me in principle that it takes some time, X amount of time, 5 seconds, to work out the answer of the sum, it means it can take time to work things out. So maybe emunah can take one individual 10 years to work out, or 50 years to work out, or 1,000 years to work out. And maybe they never have the life circumstances and time. Maybe they only live for 70 years on planet Earth and never get their chance to work out this question that takes 1,000 years for them to work out. What I'm saying is that Rabbi Chanan may be right, that it may be right. It's not for me to say, but we can accept the premise that a genuine engagement with this world can lead one to truth of emunah, and also accept that can be a very long and tough journey in which individuals simply don't have the opportunity to in some cases at least, it may take people many years to get there, or don't have the opportunity to get there ever in the span of their lives. What I mean to say is that when I am interacting with a non-believer, I don't think we need to retreat to the only reason they're disagreeing with me must be some hidden bias. I think there could be other reasons why they're disagreeing with me, including that life is complicated and they're simply trying to work out, crunch the same data as I am, and are for now at least coming to a different conclusion on the matter. Yeah.
Also personal experiences, but also how they interpret things. For some people, car nearly knocked down and it shows there is a God, otherwise it would have been knocked down. For somebody else, there isn't a God.
I absolutely agree. I'm using now an analogy which I think is profoundly flawed, in which I'm just referring to emunah as crunching numbers. I'm simply arguing, even if you think it's as simple as crunching numbers, it can still be very complicated and take a long time. And I absolutely agree with you. I think this whole analogy is not right. I think when we're talking about emunah, it very much is affected by, look, I'm just sitting here drinking a cup of coffee for those of you online who can't see. So often in my life, and I'm sure in everyone else's life, one goes through an experience, and you assess the experience of. I had this a while back on a Friday night. I went to shul Friday night. I think now is stunningly beautiful on a Friday night, and I came out and I was walking down Brent Street back home, and I just felt like it's just a bit flat this week. The Balto filler wasn't so good. I didn't speak so well. All a bit, And I got home. I realised I was very tired after I made Kiddush, so I had a quick cup of coffee, a little bit of caffeine, a few granules of caffeine, and suddenly the world brightens up. And actually, I think it was quite nice. And yeah, no, it was quite compared to the atmosphere was pretty good. And I use this as a silly analogy of so much of our lives. We're in a situation, a family dynamic, a relationship, something's going on, and we're just feeling we're going to have a good night's sleep. And the next morning we wake up, and yeah, the issue's resolvable. It's not so bad. It worked through it. Yeah, everything's fine. And we make sense of this. I spoke yesterday in shul in my Joshua about the narrative of life, the story of life, and so on. We live a narrative, and we try to string together experiences, and we make sense of it. And so often how we make sense of it can be affected by quirks of personality, or even more trivially and eye-opening by a few granules of coffee, or more healthily, I'm not recommending coffee as a way of dealing with it, but more healthily, a few hours of sleep. So I absolutely agree with you. When we look at this wonderful world of ours and we try and make sense of it, what's the narrative behind it? Is this a reflection of a destination, a vision, a purpose, a mind, a ratzon, a will for the world, a meaning that can be found for it? Or is it this overwhelmingly chaotic and confusing maelstrom of difficulty and challenge and so on, can be affected by a few granules of coffee or a few hours sleep, or more profoundly by childhood experiences and culture and everything else. So I'm simply arguing with Rabbi Chanan. I think even if we take it as simply as 1 and 1 is 2, and we look at the world and say, well, obviously there's a Borei Olam over here, and many Ma'aminim feel that. I do feel that. We look at this world and it's an amazing world, and many people do find it astonishingly simple. But one also needs to look around at other people that one meets and recognize that there seem to be very honest human beings, some of whom, by the way, are in deep pain about non-emunah, some of whom are going through great difficulty. They have every family reason and every social dynamic and every kahila link and every personality that wants to be Ma'amin, and often is struggling with this. And yet they look at the same complicated, fascinating world that we live in and come to different conclusions about it. So I think there's a challenge there in this model of viewing it as simply as that. So this is I think a more profound challenge or question that one might raise against Rabbi Chanan. So Leonard used the example of Avraham Avinu, and I think the very example of Avraham Avinu brings this point out. Avraham Avinu did arrive at emunah, but it took him time to get there also. I think, again, forgive me if I'm repeating myself, I may have mentioned this before. There are 2 medrashim that speak about how old Avraham was when he arrived at emunah. And there's a medrash that says he was 3, and there's another medrash that says he was roughly 50. I say roughly 50 because they're different size in the medrash: 40, 47, 48, 50, 53. There are different versions of the medrash. But one in which he reached emunah in his around 50 in his middle age, and one in which he reached emunah when he was very, very young. Now, how do we make sense of the medrash that he reached Emunah when he was very, very young? And when he was 3, it's a difficult medrash. I guess the medrash is telling us he was a child prodigy. I think I've used this analogy before. He was a child genius. He arrived at profound philosophical truths at a very young age. There are such individuals. If you Google child prodigy, you'll find individuals who at age 3 play advanced chess or compose, are capable of playing a whole musical piece, or compose works of great profundity. And in other areas, there are the rare child prodigies, one a century, right? Once in 100 years, someone who's born who's a complete outlier on the sort of bell curve of intelligence. So this medrash is saying Avraham was such an individual. He was a remarkable genius who already at 3 arrives at philosophical truth. Okay, the Rambam, very interestingly, Paskins, we can use the word Paskin, and he brings his introduction to Avodah Zarah and monotheism. I'm talking about a Mishnah Torah, by the way. This is not a piece from Moed Avachim. The Rambam Paskins both Midrashim. He quotes both Midrashim, puts both of them there. And the way he says them is typical Rambam genius. He says at age 3, Avram began questioning and rejecting Avodah Zarah. And at age, I think the Rambam's case was 40. At age 40, he arrives at belief in Hashem. Now, that means to say, the Rambam is resolving both Midrashim. He says he began questioning at 3 and arrives at truth at 40. Now, first of all, anyone who knows 3-year-olds knows this is perfectly feasible, certainly an intelligent 3-year-old's question, and Rambam may well, Avram, perfectly understand what that 3. You're saying, Daddy, why are we backing down to this piece of stone that you just made yesterday in the workshop? So Avram's a brilliant person. He's still a child genius. He's a brilliant individual. But age 3, he rejects Avodah Zarah. He begins questioning Avodah Zarah. Age 40, however one has the Girsa, somewhere in his later years, he arrives at Emunah. So I find this Rambam awe-inspiring on many counts. First of all, because I love it how the Rambam puts the 2 Midrashim together. It's such a very beautiful piece of parshanut from the Rambam. It's a very nice Rambam. Secondly, it means that Avram spent 37 years minimum, depending on the Girsa, struggling. So for 37 years, he's saying, can't you see this is rubbish? He's turning to everyone in his generation. He says this Rambam, by the way. He's turning to everyone and questioning. He's turning to everyone saying, what on earth are you doing? So they say, okay, Mr. Uber Chacham, okay, Mr. Clever. So what's your answer to the question? I don't know. I don't know what the alternative is. I could say this is wrong, but I can't arrive to any firm conclusions. It takes a remarkable amount of intellectual honesty to critique what everyone else is saying and say there's something. We all can have these experiences. It could be in work, it could be in business, it could be in interactions. Something's not smelling right. Something isn't good here. This isn't making sense. What's your solution? I don't know. So we have to do something. No, sometimes in life you don't have to do something. It's better to do nothing and acknowledge that we don't know the answers and continue investigating rather than going the wrong way. So for 37 years, Avram is questioning. By the way, Chazal have some clues around this. There is an Agadah to Gemara which says that Avram's Masechta of Avodah Zarah had 400 chapters. Now, again, we don't know exactly what this Gemara means, like all Agadah Gemaras. 400 is in Agadas, by the way, numbers play very important roles. They're symbolic. There's often symbolic numbers which Agadah chooses to convey age of 400 men. 40, by the way, is very symbolic in the Torah. It's the amount of time it takes to create or destroy a world. So 40 days on which the rain is going down in the Mabul, or 40 days in which the Jews are, years in which the Jews are in the Midbar, they're being rebuilt and recreated. Or Moshe's up there for 40 days receiving the Torah, and then 40 days doing Shuvah, 40 days receiving the Torah for the second time. 40 is one of these symbolic numbers. Chazal say an Uba b'mei imoy, a child 40 days after conception already has some form and status as a fetus, as opposed to just being Maya Ba'alma before that. So 40 is the time it takes to so there are numbers that are symbolic. So whatever exactly 400 means, whether this is a symbolic Chazal or whether it's from oral tradition, when we discussed Torah Sheba'al Peh and Midrashim, we discussed whether Chazal had access to ancient traditions that were passed down through the people, not necessarily even through the channels of Torah or not. But Chazal say Avram wrote a 400 Masechta Avodah Zarah. Now, I don't know exactly what that means, but one can posit that what they're saying is that he engaged in an enormous amount of research. He had a 400 chapter thesis or research work to arriving at understanding of the conclusions he came to. The point I'm trying to make is it took Avram a lot of hard work. And it took him years and years to get there. Now, had a bolt of lightning struck Avram at age 36 or age 39, he would never have become Avram, right? And had he been a little slower, not the genius Avram, maybe it wouldn't have taken him 40 years, but 80 years to get there. And had he been less able to think, maybe it would have taken 120 years or 200 years, and maybe he would have never got there in the length and lifespan of an old person. I'm simply saying that, at least according to the Rambam, even a figure like Avram, it still took him time to get there. And therefore, this idea that everyone can get there instantly and easily, I think is something that needs a little challenging. And this is the sort of the next thing that I would want to unpick in this mahalach of answering. Again, I want to recognize, just for the sake of intellectual honesty, that Rabbi Zobin represents a very, very important strand of Jewish thought. This is not an attempt to say either or. I'm simply explaining why there may be alternative ways of looking at these things other than Rabbi Hanan's approach here. Oh, I'm labeling Rabbi Hanan's approach by this sort of approach. See, there's a question here. Okay, it's a continuation, I think, of the the same person who posted this share caused me to give this share originally. The underlying question is why these people exist. Born to misery, people in North Korea born to misery. How do people? Okay, that's the thing. People born killed Kiddush Hashem. I'm not going to go into Kiddush Hashem. Okay, so the first two parts of the question that was posted in the chat is really a continuation of this idea. People who are born to misery. The underlying question is why do these people exist? Sorry if I haven't been clear. I'm going to be arguing in my answer to this question that even people born in North Korea have. I'm going to give a two-part answer to my question. I would challenge first of all the premise of the question. I don't know enough about life in North Korea to answer this question exactly. But I suspect even in North Korea, people have moments in their lives of enjoyment and happiness and so on. I think the idea that they sort of are born to unrelenting misery from start to finish, I would challenge. Look, maybe there are people born to unrelenting misery, but maybe people born with great ill health and in great distress. Individuals born, maybe in very, very critical and crippling conditions from a very young age. Even there, though, I mean, in many cases we can't interview them and know what their lives are about. We just had this very tragic court case in the UK with this ultra fixer, this young. There's an enormous amount of argument about what her experiences are. The truth is, we have no idea. I mean, it can be argued on a legal level how law should treat it, but on a sort of moral and philosophical level, we have no idea what her experiences are like. As soon as we encounter people who are well enough to speak, there are individuals who are born to situations of deep misery that indeed describe life as unrelentingly miserable, and other people that exist in states of ostensible or the deep disability and so on, who find meaning in their lives and go on and achieve things and seem to have a quality of life. So I think there are premises around the question that need to be questioned, that need to be challenged. And the second premise around the question, which is that these people have no access to genuine spirituality, I'm going to challenge, and I'm trying to challenge now, by arguing that if indeed we sort of adopt this posture that spirituality is all or nothing, and if one doesn't have emunah in the Yud Gimel Ikrim, then one has absolutely no basis to spiritual existence, and one is finished and has no spiritual purpose. Indeed, the question is good, but I don't think that's a correct understanding of the topic. The Rambam has, we discussed the concept of Tinuk Shenishba. The Rambam has a acceptance that there are people born into circumstances in which they can't believe yet. They are too young to have emunah, perhaps. And all the Rambam is saying in his Yud Gimel Ikrim is someone who has sophisticated and declared and thought through non-belief is a kofar, is a heretic. Someone who is a little baby who's never had the chance to think, or a conceptual Tinuk Shenishba, someone who hasn't been exposed to a society which genuinely leads them to question, like even Karaites living side by side with Orthodox Jews, but are never take seriously that stance because they are raised in a Karaite home and they've simply inherited these truths from the parents. Even the Rambam agrees that such a person is a Tinuk Shenishba, is not someone who qualifies as a heretic. So it's important to say that the Rambam, who perhaps represents the most challenging version and call on all human beings to think and philosophize and question, equally is the figure who most powerfully presented the argument that an intelligent, thought-through, sophisticated adult in their 20s, living in Cairo, in Fustat, next to Orthodox religious Jews, and has been raised as a Karaite, is not held culpable, is not held responsible for their limitations. And if we apply the concept of Tinuk Shenishba, as many have, to the Yud Gimel Ikrim, is not held to be a kofar, including my own rabbi, by the way, in Rabbi Zobin and others, understand that this applies even to Ikrei Emunah. then even the Rambam is admitting that there's a limit to how much we demand of people to question the premises with which they are raised. And a Karaite who was brought up on these beliefs and therefore never seriously considered others has the status of a Tinuk Shenishba. The third point I'm going to argue is that we have a mistake when we expect the world to be fair. And again, this is something we've spoken about a little bit before, but I will repeat it. I don't think there is a justified Jewish or philosophical argument to expect the world to be fair in the way that the questioner here is posing this. But let's just spend a few minutes unpicking each of these strands, given that we only have a little bit of time left, and this will be the last year, by the way, for those who are online. Before the break, I'll resume in the first or second week of January. But I want to just try and finish off this complicated topic in a few minutes that's available. So let me just elaborate then on 2 points before we draw this to a conclusion. If we recognize and acknowledge that it is not always easy to arrive at the truth, and that this is a journey, and that this takes time, and even Avraham Avinu engages this in steps, and it's part of a process, then it is possible that even according to the Rambam, and certainly according to those who argue on the Rambam, someone can have spirituality in their life in other shapes and forms, and that would be sufficient to have a genuine purpose and meaning and direction in life. This is really a subject again for a more significant share, but it is, I think, true to say that according to the Rambam, belief in Hashem is essential if one wants to be someone who believes there is absolute purpose and meaning. And I think the Rambam would argue that in a universe without a Ratzon, without a will that has brought it into existence, is a universe where ultimately life is meaningless. If were there to be no such will, were we to exist in a universe which was genuinely either self-generated and existed forever, uncaused, as perhaps some of the Greeks believed, though not others, or were we to live in a universe, as perhaps modern science argues, which is just a random coalescing of material and matter, and human beings are simply biomass who exist for 700,000 years in the history of the universe and then cease to exist again? Were we to believe that this situation was one uncaused by divine purpose and plan, the Rambam I think, would argue that such a universe would be a meaningless one, a random coalescence of particles that randomly brought our existence into being in a universe that's ultimately indifferent to anything that we human beings believe. So let's say you have someone who indeed believes that the universe is a random collection of acts, and that's probably most of the population now believes. But at the same time, they also believe there is purpose and meaning to life. And they firmly believe that you should do that which is good because it's good and because it's meaningful and purposeful. And their soul, their mind, it finds abhorrence and evil that is done by people that is evil, and meaning and purpose and direction for that is good. And they would in the extreme sacrifice enormous amounts of money or health or even life in order to stand up for that which is right and good. So what would we say about such a person? So the Rambam would argue that such a person is inconsistent and a flawed thinker. Okay. He would argue that such a person philosophically is incoherent. It doesn't make sense to maintain both things together. Okay. But is this therefore a person who isn't touching infinity? Is this a person who has no access to that which is beyond? Is this someone who is incapable of transcending the human existence? Is this someone who isn't able to rise above that which is material, as Torah calls upon us to do, and to transcend that and to genuinely touch that which is good, to genuinely achieve something of meaning and purpose? Well, the answer, I think, would be that it's true the person is inconsistent, but equally this is someone who is transcending their material existence. This is someone who is touching nitzchias, who is touching infinity, who is touching eternity, who is achieving something that is worthwhile. It is a pity, as the Rambam says, that this person isn't able to channel that through Tariq mitzvahs. They aren't able to use the resources and the gifts that the Torah gives us. They are missing opportunities to do this. They may not succeed in doing this in as full a manner as the model which the Torah lays out and the plan that the Torah gives to create a society in which people are engaged in this consistently. But is this person completely removed from anything? Is this person who has no spiritual life and inner life and transcendent life? Is this person purely material being? again, let's plumb what Reb Chaim meant when he said, Nebuch apikos is ochin apikos, someone who, this isn't a punishment, this is a consequence. What Reb Chaim is saying is that in the thinking of the Rambam, someone who doesn't touch infinity, someone who doesn't transcend materialism, someone who has defined their consciousness solely as pursuit and engagement with that which is physical and material, is a glorified animal, a glorified cow. There's nothing. When the person loses their physical existence and ends up just as a consciousness or a neshama or a soul, however we want to phrase it, so the person has no existence because they haven't actualized any of their mind, they haven't actualized any of their intelligence, they haven't touched that which is beyond, they haven't engaged in anything that is immaterial, that is beyond the material, that is transcendent. They're simply absorbed in that which is finite and limited and physical and tangible. So that is correct. Anyone who hasn't arrived at anything beyond, that is transcendent, has no existence. The Rambam argues in his Yud Gimel Ikrim, and again, one can question why these 13 are so important, but this is how the Rambam understands it, and this is, by and large, how Yiddishkeit has accepted the formulation, that these are the 13 things which are needed to genuinely, in the fullest way possible, engage in a transcendent life. Someone who rejects these, according to the Rambam, has removed themselves from any spiritual existence. That's when they are a consistent person. The Rambam believes each of these are necessary keys to genuinely and consistently believing in and engaging in and being a person who has a transcendence in their life. This is for the thought-through person. But what happens to the non-thought-through person? For the Avraham Avinu in the first 37, in the gap of 37 years between 3 and 40, for our Mongolian goat herds, for our brothers and sisters living here in the Western world, for all of us, what happens to us where we are not fully thought through, and we are to a greater or lesser degree a Tinuk Shanishma, and we're still engaged in a journey of trying to put everything together and make sense of everything. We are not therefore determining with confidence, I don't believe, Ein Eloka, there is no God, or whatever it is. I'm simply saying I'm not able to answer these questions, but I do know there is something transcendent and meaningful about life, and I genuinely engage in with great sacrifice often to do acts of kindness and care for others, and to minimize suffering. I believe in an absolute right and wrong. I believe in a good. I believe in that which is virtuous and meaningful. Is such a person without transcendence? Is such a person without spirituality? Such a person not touching that which is beyond physical existence? I think even the Rambam would agree that they do. And therefore, I would argue our metaphorical Mongolian goat herd, our North Korean citizen, is capable of engaging in meaningful spiritual experiences. I don't think this should be a chidush. The Rambam is simply formulating what are philosophically necessary as the 13 coherent components to arrive at a holistic sense of spirituality. And someone who genuinely is consistent and steps out of one of these, indeed, has removed themselves from spirituality. But the idea that someone who isn't part of that world and hasn't engaged consistently with this, and nonetheless firmly embeds themselves in a sense of that which is meaningful and right, I think it is correct to say that everyone would agree such a person has a spiritual existence. So part one to my answer to this question is chas v'shalom, God forbid, our fellow human beings created b'tselem Elokim who are living lives in Outer Mongolia or North Korea, still have meaningful choices to make in their life and still have the opportunity of spirituality and spiritual achievement, as do we. Each of us in our own way, given our life circumstances and our life experiences. So this is one half of what I've been trying to say over this last share, and I hope actually too many of the shiurim I've given around these topics. The second point I would make is that I think we face confusion, and again, this is something I've discussed before, but I want to spell out here. I think we face confusion between that which is not just and that which is unfair. Judaism commits itself to justice. We believe that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is meant to be just. Hashofet kol haaretz liyasa mishpat, hatzor tomim kichol derach mishpat, elem kel emunah ve'ein ovel, tzadik v'yashahu. We believe that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is perfect. He's a tzadik v'yasha, kel emunah ve'ein ovel, a God of faithfulness without dishonesty. Kol derach mishpat, all his ways are mishpat. We believe that the certainly a God who engages in mishpat, and that which is just. And Avraham Avinu challenges Hashofet kol haaretz liyasa mishpat. I have an expectation of you, God, that you should do mishpat. I think this is very different to the concept of fairness. And I think fairness, unlike justice, is a childish concept that doesn't really make sense. And I've used this analogy before in a different context, in the context of I use it in a different setting. I'll use the analogy again. if I choose to allocate to Avram a stipend of £1 a day, and I choose to allocate to Neil a stipend of £5 a day, and to Leonard a stipend of £10 a day, it may be unfair, but it's not unjust. I'm choosing to give you gifts. I'm choosing to gift you £1 a day. I'm choosing to gift you £5. I'm choosing to gift you I'm choosing to gift you £10 a day. Do you have a claim of injustice against me? You should. I spoke about it in the context of thankfulness and appreciation of life. That's where we spoke about it, and end of life.
When you get some giving money to the children, one child may feel, in that situation, maybe the father was just needs a prayer, child may feel.
Absolutely. There may be feelings of hurt. You may wonder why, I don't know, offense intended, why I gave Leonard the tenner, I gave you only one. Thank you.
I'll
sort it out later. £10.50 each, yeah. But the concept is not one of injustice. It's unfairness. And the only correct response ultimately is, thank you very much for my undeserved £1 a day, and thank you very much for the undeserved £10 a day. I spoke about it in the context of what happens when these run out. What happens if one day you wake up and I'm stop giving you? Do you have a right to complain? We spoke about appreciation. That's where we spoke about this idea. If you're given a free gift every day, again, there may be emotional upset because I've come to rely on the gift, and now why are you rejecting me by stopping giving me the gift? And what's happened today that was different to yesterday? And how did I offend you? But is there a claim of injustice in stopping to allocate the gift freely? There's no claim of injustice. I freely gave you a gift, and I'm now choosing to cease to give the gift. Now, you may wish to know, why is it that I'm choosing this? And there may be answers to the questions which are unfathomable to human beings, and we get back to Rabbi Zovin's mashal. Or there may not be. There may be other reasons. But injustice, maybe we have a right to understand justice, right? It may be if we couldn't understand the justice of a situation, we could complain. But unfairness, I don't think philosophically there's a. I know when we spoke about this in the concept of equality, because this is where we discuss these ideas also. We often expect to have equality in life, and equality is one of these messy concepts that needs to be unpicked, particularly when we talk about Judaism, which is behechlet and a non-egalitarian faith, right? It depending on how you use the word equality, it certainly fails in some respects, right? We have Ben Yisrael Amim, we have Kohanim Levim Yisraelim, we have men and women, we have many areas where I'll come to the second. We have many areas where equality, at least in the simplistic sense, can be challenged. And one of the things one needs to unpick when one talks about the concept of equality is this difference between fairness and unfairness on one hand, and justice and injustice on the other hand. Injustice is a problem, a very profound problem. Unfairness is interesting, something maybe we'd love to understand, but it's not. There isn't a moral cry against something which is unfair. And therefore, I would say that I don't think we are committed to the idea that every human being is fairly allocated things in life. It is clearly the case that we live in an unfair and perhaps unequal world. It is legitimate to accept that people are put in far more difficult situations and far easier situations. We look at our own family histories. Our ancestors who came from the Middle East or North Africa or the Russian Imperial settlement had horrible and miserable lives in a very profound way. They were allocated far less than even the £1 a day. They were the person who I didn't mention was given a penny a day so they are given far less. The fact that this is unfair, though, I don't think is a moral problem. They are simply allocated less. Similarly, in the spiritual sense, I recognize that it may be that our Mongolian goat herd or our North Korean citizen may be given less spiritual coinage also. In other words, they may be only given 1 penny a day rather than £1 a day or £10 a day that having access to Torah and mitzvahs gives us. And they have a harder lot. It may be more difficult for them to find that meaning and the transcendence in life, but they have opportunities. And I would therefore challenge the premise that there's a moral problem about an injustice of existence. I want to finish off. I recognize it is easy to sit here in the comforts of Hendon. I've said this before, and make these statements. And I don't mean to be dismissive of it. I recognize people have painfully difficult lives. I'm simply saying that we have no choice but to accept this. Meaning to say, we live in a world in which the reality is, whatever one's faith is, by the way, forget this share, forget emunah and anything else. The reality is we live in a world in which each of us can look at those who have been given a smaller stipend than us per day, and we can look at those who have been given a bigger stipend than us today. And we all know our own life circumstances, and all of us know that we carry pain on our backs. We are walking around schlepping heavy bags. That all of us have areas of difficulty. Some more, some less, and probably no way to measure this. We have no choice but to accept this is the world, this is the universe we live in. And all we can do to survive it, to meaningfully engage in it, is to accept I need to appreciate my stipends. And if it's £1 a day, I need to enjoy that pound. If it's £10 a day, I need to enjoy that £10 a day. There's nothing else I can do. Yiddishkeit cannot be a philosophy which is out of touch with reality. It buys into that, it accepts it. It doesn't have a problem with it. It simply says this is what we're called upon to do, to appreciate daily the gift of that which is given to us and to try and do our best with that gift. And not much is achieved by looking at others who, in our perception, wrongly or rightly, have been given bigger gifts. Maybe they have, maybe they haven't. We don't really know what people's experiences are like from the inside. Maybe the person in North Korea, in some respects, has a better quality life than what we are going through. We don't know these questions. All we can say is it doesn't help us by looking at other people's stipends. It only helps us to look at the gifts that we are freely given. And I think this is philosophically profound and correct, and I think also an answer to the questions that we set out, that we posed at the beginning of this mini series.
You're making your bracha in the morning.
Yes.
Are you doing it? Are you doing it so from a chesed that Baruch was giving to you, or is it your stipend, or from angle? When you're saying your bracha and all these things, that
the Birchas HaShachar are recognition of freely given, undeserved gifts. That's exactly what they are. They are freely given, undeserved gifts that I'm given daily as a gift by Hashem. I shouldn't have used the word stipend, even I should have spoken about gift. I'm given daily, I'm given daily as a gift, and one day they will stop being given to me as a gift. That's what the Birchas HaShachar are. Absolutely, and that's what Yiddishkeit calls upon us. It's a consciousness-altering exercise. We need to look at everything we see in the world and every experience we have and see it as a freely given gift that we need to appreciate. Undeserved, complete surprise, unexpected. It's interesting, Yitzchak Avinu, who personifies this mindset, he's Midas Hadin, that of strict justice. We might have expected to be a gloomy fellow, but he isn't. His name is Yitzchak. And if we take his name as symbolizing something, it means he laughs through life. You laugh when you're surprised. Yitzchak goes through life constantly surprised, because every good thing that he achieves is always a constant surprise. I didn't expect to wake up this morning. I didn't expect to have this. I didn't have to. Everything is an undeserved privilege and an unexpected surprise, in which nothing that took place previously led me to believe. The fact that I was alive a minute ago in no way guarantees my existence now, a minute later. We know that. I mean, we know that's profoundly the case, because unfortunately we've seen too often, and that is the case. One minute someone's sitting there talking, the next minute they're not. And all we can say is every moment of life, wow, this is a profound pleasure. I've used an analogy, and forgive me if it's a seasonal analogy, but it's like waking up every morning and finding a pile of presents at the foot of one's bed. Every morning we wake up and there's a pile of presents at the foot of one's bed, which are these freely given gifts, the pounds that are allocated to us of the seconds of that day. That are an unexpected prevalent. And we say, thank you, Hashem, that I woke up this morning and that there's this pile of presents at the end of my bed. I didn't expect it. I couldn't have expected it. And one day we'll wake up and the pile of presents will be a little smaller because we're not going to make it through that day. And that's the way it is. So I hope that answers this topic somewhat. And I wish everyone a good day. And Emiyat Hashem will resume in January.
Thank you.